Okay, I think we might as well get started since this is being recorded, so whoever comes in late can catch up with us. Good evening, everyone. My name is Professor Volker Janssen. I'm at the Department of History at Cal State Fullerton, currently Vice Chair, and generally deeply interested in having our former students tell us about the things they do. And so this fits broadly into the series of roundtable conversations we've had over the past 6 years or so, careers in history. And so we have had our former students working in law, in tourism, in government, in teaching, in museums and archives and libraries, talk to us about their experiences and hopefully in the process are illuminating and helping current students make better decisions. Today, we have a large panel of former students that are currently completing their PhDs. And we could have made this panel much larger still. And I'm kind of, I don't mean to brag, but I feel sort of proud that there's quite a few of our former students actually in PhD programs. And why that is a big deal, we'll find out in a little bit. So I think the first thing we should do is actually turn to our panelists and have them introduce themselves. Before we do that, but we should do first introduce them, but before we do that, I want to pitch yet another event, also with an alumna, and that's Nicole Eichmann-Colvara. She is currently at the University of Colorado Boulder, Director of Digital Scholarship at the Center for Research Data and Digital Scholarship, and also an assistant professor there. And she is giving a talk on campus next Tuesday, May 10th at 1 p.m. in the brand new COPH, the Center for Oral and Public History conference room, about, what's the title of her talk is Critical Anatomies and Good Deaths, the Social Technical Lives of Digital Projects. So that is one more event that should help you build your critical thinking and practical skills for future careers. So that's coming up next week. But now I'm going to turn to our outline. Clearly, I expected a different page. So we'll begin with an introduction of the panel members. And then we're going to go through a whole series of questions where everyone will have something to say. So we'll first talk about your universities, then about the preparation that you received at Cal State Fullerton, the research that you do currently, the plans you have, and then we'll turn to your lessons and your key advice for the students that are here and that will be listening to this at a later time. And then for those of you who are there, Rachel and Ryan specifically, you can ask your questions. And by the way, for the panelists, if you think this is a small turnout, I have given conference papers with panels that were about 6 large, and we had an audience of 2. That is when you get slotted for Sunday morning at 8:30. Okay, so how about we go from left to right. Just a brief introduction. You'll have a chance to talk a whole lot more later on the questions. So Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, so my name's Chris. I got my bachelor's degree at Cal State Fullerton in 2013, master's degree in the history department at PSUF in 2016. I'm now at UC Irvine. I've been there since 2016. I should be graduating, fingers crossed, next year when the dissertation is completed. My area of work is in modern South Asia. So I work on India in the early 20th century, just in the twilight of the British Empire, and specifically on Hindu nationalism. So, yeah.
Thank you. Renee.
Hello, I'm Renee Jean. I was born and raised Fullerton, California, so it was kind of a no-brainer to go to Cal State Fullerton to get my BA, and then I decided I had enough of California for about 22 years, and I moved to Boston, Massachusetts to get my MA in, when was that? Oh, 2020 at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And I just yesterday finished my first year of my PhD at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So I clearly can't pick one place to kind of put down roots. but that goes along with me, I guess, being a transnationalist by trade. So I study anti-imperialism, transnationalist terrorism.
All right. Thank you, Renee. Sarah.
Okay, hello everyone. So I received my bachelor's at Cal State Fullerton in 2015, then my master's in 2017 with an emphasis in US history and modern European. And then I wanted to try my hand at teaching, and I became an adjunct instructor at Cypress College, Coastline, then UCI, and then most recently Concordia. So I'm very much so I'm in the adjunct hustle, kind of hopping around different universities. Because of that, I didn't want to jump straight into my PhD until I knew exactly how I was going to use it and market it. So then in 2020, I actually did go to, I began my PhD at Claremont Graduate University, but this time around it was very different. I have a emphasis in museum studies, and part of the reason I went there is because of their museum studies program, and I'm actually in the process of trying to build a museum of cosmetic history, which is another kind of random twist in the journey, because while I was actually at Cal State Fullerton, I worked as a professional makeup artist. So now for my dissertation, I'm kind of combining my loves of history, makeup, and museums. And then, so that's what I'm up to now, all of the PhD stuff and teaching as well.
Sounds like a fantastic fit. Thank you. Miguel.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Miguel Quirarte. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton last year, getting my MA with a thesis route. I took some time off between 2016 to 2018. And before that, I also did my undergrad at Cal State Fullerton. I got my BA in 2016. Currently, in just a few weeks, I'll be finishing my first year as a PhD student at UC Irvine. And my areas of specialty are Latin American history, more specifically looking at Asian diasporas in Mexico in late 19th to early 20th century.
Thank you, Miguel. And finally, Donald. I don't remember, do you go by Don or Donald?
Don is fine, Don or Donald, but yeah. Don is how I usually introduce myself, but I always show up on these things by default as Donald, so either one works. But so anyway, my name is Don. I have a sort of long and winding degree path. I got my undergraduate in history BA at George Washington University in 2001, then didn't go back to school until I went to Fullerton in 2010, where I got an MA in 2013. And then sort of jumped around different part-time teaching jobs, and then started a PhD program at UC Santa Cruz, where I'm currently a PhD candidate and hoping to file by the end of the calendar year. My research looks at Union veteran communities in California in the 19th century. So a lot of Union veterans migrated from across the country, ended up in California and helped shape culture and politics. So that is sort of my area of study. And I'm currently instructor of record at UC Santa Cruz for individual classes that I'm picking up. I'm not a full-time instructor. And I also teach at University of Phoenix, which is another, different kind of cohort, but private university teaching. And that's actually been pretty consistent. So I could talk about that later. Volker.
Great. So we have two students who are very close to finishing, right? Chris and Don. And then three of you, Miguel, Renee, and Sarah, sort of at the beginning of your journey. So you might even sort of enjoy listening to each other's advice and experiences. What I think we should start with is talk a little bit, for the benefit of our current students, about what it's like to be a PhD student. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, and I ask you because my PhD experience is now 17 years ago. Are there any perks to being a PhD student? Do you feel a little more special when you walk on campus?
Well, for me, unfortunately, most of it has been online. So that is kind of a perk, but then kind of the downside to it is it's taken a while to kind of get to know my class, and have only set foot on the campus a few times. So I haven't really felt that part of it yet, but hopefully when we all go back in person, I'll get to know more of my colleagues a little bit.
So you're not yet on campus this semester?
No, I stayed online this semester. I have gone on campus a few times to talk to my advisor in person. So I went to the library, checked things out, but at Claremont, it's still, we kind of took it like 1 week at a time. Policies are changing a lot with things. So hopefully next semester it will be all back in person though. So I'm looking forward to that.
How's that for the rest of you? Does it feel just a little, I mean, Renee and Miguel, you're also fairly new in your PhD student identity. Does it feel any different? Does it feel special?
I have a little bit of a blend because, again, it's been a little bit difficult with a lot of things not being on campus and stuff like that. Luckily, the courses that I've been teaching as a TA have been on campus. But it's kind of a silly perk that I kind of get a weird satisfaction from of, I'm a pretty small and I'm short and I have kind of a really young face. And so I'll walk into a classroom and people will be like talking amongst themselves. And then I get to walk up to the front of the classroom and be the instructor when they were talking to me, like, however. I've had some like awkward instances with that. But I feel very powerful when I get to do that and like walk up and be like, all right, I'm your instructor for the next year. So be nice to me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Anybody else?
Yeah, for me, it's an interesting phase of like the in-between, because you are a student, but you're also like an equal to the department, right? It was a little weird for me to get used to calling my professors by their first names. Most of them like to be called, in their first name instead of professor or doctor, and some of the professors, the first and second years we get evaluated, and you get to read some of their evaluations. And one of my professors said it was great having Miguel. He's very he participates in class, and he's a wonderful colleague. And I'm like, oh, I don't have my degree, or I'm not but it's flattering, it's very humbling, because on one aspect, you're still carrying a backpack to your classes and you're still submitting assignments for grades. But at the same time, there's another set of responsibilities, in this program. So,
yeah. Dawn, I think you had your mic open briefly.
Yeah, I would just add, you mentioned perks. What's a perk of being a PhD student? And one way that I would address that, and I imagine this will be more possible once people start going back to campus. But like there was teacher training institutes, CITL, on our campus. And a lot of times they bring PhD students from all different kinds of disciplines together to prepare syllabi and so forth. And so just being in a room of 30 or 40 PhD students in astronomy and literature, really talking about some incredibly bright people and being able to converse with them as colleagues and hear about their research, I would say that's absolutely a perk of being a PhD student.
Yes, I can see. Chris, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the big perk that I remember back in 2015 is that it came with a funding package. Like, how exciting! Like, I'm going to get paid to be a student, which is something that's different than the master's level generally. Although there are some programs that might fund you, but yeah, what's one of the big things for the PhD program? If you're in a competitive program, you will probably get funded for it. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and so all these things you mentioned, it's absolutely true. That there is that professors make it for PhD student a deliberate attempt to sort of transition them into the role of colleagues and peers. And I thought it was an American thing when I came here in 1999 as an exchange student, that my advisor said, I'm Michael. And I thought, oh, this is great. And it really felt, I jumped on this right away. I had none of those German apprehensions about formal differences. I enjoyed that so much. And I still today find it sometimes strange that at the master's level we have thesis defenses on campus, and all the professors even call each other professor to maintain that formality, and I can't keep that up. And I think for master students even you should, maybe start softening those boundaries a little bit. But yeah, these are these small little signals that tell you something's different here. And yeah, Chris, most people have to think hard about how to pay for their college education and also for their master's. But once you get to the PhD, that's not really, certainly in the humanities and social sciences, that's not really something you have to put money in anymore. They offer you paths to make that happen. If it doesn't come with a full funding package, it usually comes with other ways to sort of balance the cost of this. And we'll talk about this later on. And yes, to be able to say, to sit amongst the students, but also walk to the front and then be in charge, it's nice. It's nice when you look for that initial boost that tells you like, you're going to be one of these faculty eventually. Now, the next question, I missed an important word. The question was, how does the PhD student-faculty relationship differ from that of BAs and MAs? And you kind of already addressed this, right? With you talking to each other by first name, and are there other things where you can tell? This is not the same student-professor relationship that I remember at Cal State Fullerton. Maybe Chris and Dawn know more about this, having been in this for a few more years. Anybody?
I guess I would just say scale, because usually if you're in a PhD program, it's going to be, anywhere from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 plus years. Some people I've known even taken 10 years. So you're talking about a really long relationship that you're going to be cultivating over time as not only your mentor, as to get into the professoriate or outside of academia, but someone who's going to be basically an editor for you, really helping you prepare your research. So it's a very close relationship. It's integral, I think, to the success of your degree program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just kind of add to that. Keep in mind for bachelors, there's so many people that have hundreds of students potentially to deal with, whereas the PhD, it's you and your advisor. Maybe your advisor has at best, a handful of other PhD students. My advisor currently has 2, me and another one of my colleagues. So it depends, and that really kind of like, it makes the relationship very intimate, and that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. That's how close you will eventually be with your advisor.
I like the caveat you put in there, the caution caveat, that means keep that in mind. This will be very close. So if you have an advisor and that person is giving you, like, you're getting a wrong vibe, or you don't feel you're just sort of relating that well, then maybe that's not the advisor for you. And I think what you're saying there, and I think what students need to hear, is that the personal connection between student and advisor is probably more important than the academic expertise overlap that should be between the two. I know my advisor was an economic historian of the 20th century, and I did crime and punishment, which was not his field at all, but his advice nonetheless always was useful. And the personal relationship was much more important for my success than him being an expert in the field. I could get others on my panel for that. So that's important. Yes, Renee, your mic was open too.
One of the big things that I know we all suffer from at various points in our academic careers is imposter syndrome. And I have felt that significantly less because of the different relationship between like BA, professor, student relationship and the PhD one. I had a pretty casual MA, so I felt this a little bit, but once you get to the PhD level, like you were saying, oftentimes your advisor and yourself don't, like, your research fields aren't necessarily going to be one and the same. So you get this recognition from professors who acknowledge that you at this point are either becoming or are an expert in your field. And so they will ask you on, like, if you have like a directed reading course with them or something, they will kind of ask you to bring your own perspective onto the readings, especially if they're like your advisor is also your kind of supervising professor for your TA-ship or anything like that. They'll often ask you to bring your own perspectives and your expertise into things because you know things that they don't, which is something that is almost unfathomable in a BA situation.
True. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Oh, Sarah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I think
No, Sarah, go ahead.
Something to add to that too, I think maybe another perk of having a really good relationship with your advisor is the networking opportunities. I think that's probably one of the number one blessings out of this whole experience is having an advisor who specializes in your field. My advisor has helped me a lot, by introducing me to different museum directors and learning more about executive management, funding, endowments. And I think that's honestly just incredibly valuable experience. So putting that effort into making sure you have a strong and very open relationship, like you can talk to your advisor about anything. I think that's probably one of the best things you could do throughout the whole experience.
I agree. And Miguel.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things Sarah and Renee were saying, like, establishing a strong bond with your advisor, because this is a person you're going to work closely for a few years, right? And you want to make sure it's healthy and open and there's good communication. And the benefits from that is that, the advisors can provide a lot of resources, I think, because it's more, it's more like a connection of like apprentice and your mentor, right? I mean, my advisor has vouched for me for a lot of funding, and I think because of her, I had this fellowship that exempts me from being a TA my fourth year, so I can go do research, so I am so in debt and gratitude to her. And also dynamics with with faculty. So I think Renee was saying, like, they learned from you also, or like they really want your views too, because we had job talks. We recruited another tenure track faculty, and after job talks every week for a candidate, we had coffee talks, which was our graduate students to interact with the candidate, feel their personality, their pedagogical possibilities. And although we don't have a say, like a voting, say, we still share with the faculty, we felt this was strong about this candidate. We feel like it was great they shared this experience, or like this hope, this ambition. And then they take that into consideration. So it's a more mutual exchange of information.
The job talks are incredibly valuable in helping you see how people make either effective or less effective presentations. Now, we haven't hired in a while. We should be hiring at some point soon because we're all getting older, as you can clearly tell. And we always try to invite certainly the master students to listen into the job talks. But I think it's only PhD students who know that they're really supposed to be there. They're really supposed to learn from these job talks and see, what do you need to do and how do you do things well? Who ultimately gets the job, right? Now, some basics here about the study plan. You may vaguely remember what an MA study plan looked like, right? There were 36 units, I believe. Is that true? What does a PhD study plan look like, and what do your grad courses look like? I think generally students here know that you don't just take coursework and like take 3 different classes for 6 years. There's something else going on, right? So what does the PhD study plan look like?
I'll say one important factor for historians especially is, in addition to seminar work in your field, probably do additional seminar work in world history or a secondary support field. And then also language preparation. Most of the students in my department had to pass one or more languages. I think East Asia had to have 2+ language. So if you're working in primary sources, especially outside of the English language, how you are going to shape your plan is, I think, going to be dependent on what your language source is.
That's right. Every PhD student, either it doesn't matter whether they're doing American history only. I believe every PhD student these days needs a second language ability. Anything else about the PhD study plan?
Yeah. So for those of you that are looking at particular universities, generally, I mean, at least UCI has this, but they will put their PhD handbook on their website. So you can kind of see more or less what the layout of the program will be. But this is something that you can probably inquire with the department, whichever university you're applying to. And then you can kind of get a sense of, okay, you have coursework, then you'll have your qualifying exams, then you do your research and your writing. So that's generally the flow of things go.
Chris and Don, for how many years did you basically do coursework? Because you're not doing coursework anymore.
So I had, it was 2 years of coursework, 1 year of for qualifying exam preparation, and then 2 years, it's kind of added more a third year because of COVID, of dissertation, research and writing. So I'm already at the tail end of it, but generally by the end of your third year, you must your qualifying exams in order to advance candidacy. So yeah, that's something Miguel will have to look forward to down the line when you get there.
Yeah, my same situation, 3 years, and then we did the qualifying exams at the end of the third year, and then I've been researching and writing PhD since. So this is year 3 of that, so year 6 total in the process.
How many courses do you take a semester in your coursework semesters?
For UCI, first year, and this is what I think it's really great about UC. I'm not sure about the other UC campuses and their PhD programs for history, but for us, we don't have to do TA the first year. We have really great funding. So we take 3 courses each quarter for the first year. And so
the quarter system?
Yeah, we're in the quarter system. So it will be your, preferably your primary field, and then maybe try to take some courses in your secondary field because you have 2 areas of specialty. And also first year and second year, we have research seminars. So, each year, 1 quarter is we take a class on gathering, it's like what would be considered like 300A. You gather, your sources, you analyze secondary sources, maybe you analyze also primary sources, and you construct like an argument for a publishing article, right? A research paper, right? And then the second quarter, we start typing, we start editing, we start peer reviewing each other's papers. So that's what it looks like the first 2 years. So not just courses in your fields, but also typing and, and peer review.
How many courses do you have where everyone's a grad student, everyone's a PhD student? Does this happen, or is this kind of the exception?
How many courses?
I mean, look, I remember in my coursework there were a ton of directed reading courses that were one-on-one. And that's a very different kind of experience, right? And then I remember some graduate courses where there was 2 students to 1 professor, which I found grueling. And then there were these courses where there were 12 at a large conference table, and they were not all PhD students. So what's the balance there? What does this look like for you?
Yeah, so there's some required courses like theory courses, and that's where you see a lot of the students because being in the same cohort, sometimes other students from other departments will take the same courses, and also including master students. So being in the master's program as a terminal degree. So in those, you see like 10 people, or, in my cohort, we have 12, which is the largest yet of a cohort quantity. Other courses, depending on your specialty, that can be even less. So last quarter, I had in one of my classes 4 students. So you really, it really shows who read and who didn't. So you really wanted to, make sure you read a lot, So yeah, it depends, but like required courses, you definitely see a bigger group of like 10, maybe a little more people. Other ones, it varies, from 3 people to as many, because it's not just the PhD history students, but also master students, and even from other fields like anthropology or literature coming in.
Renee and Sarah, your thoughts?
I apparently have a very different study plan, just like timeline wise. But that might be a Canadian/American divide, but it also might be just I'm not in any of the UC programs, which now I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't apply to any. But we have 1 year of courses, and all of them are basically, unless you do a directed reading, all of them are, you have about 3 to 4 PhD students in a course, and then about 10 MAs, which I thought was actually very helpful, because it sort of put a lot of responsibility on you as a PhD student to really know your stuff. And then we have the worry, all the PhD students have the worry and the kind of knowledge in the back of our heads that the courses that we're taking, all of those readings will probably be on our comprehensive exams, which are what we have at York. We have those in November of this year. So you do 1 year of courses, and then basically like midway through your 3rd term, you do your qualifying exams. So most of my courses were very MA student heavy, but in some ways that made it a little bit more challenging. And I did about 3 per term.
Sarah?
Yeah, I actually have a very similar experience to Renee, where all of the courses I've taken at Claremont so far, it's been a mix of master's and PhD students. I don't know how this is with everyone else's programs, but at Claremont, they actually, for the coursework portion of our overall program, they allowed us to transfer up to 24 units from our master's program to help kind of shave off some of the timeline and pressure to help us get closer to our qualifying exams and then our dissertation research. So I don't know if that happens in all programs, but that for me, that definitely was kind of a selling point. I was like, that helps save some money. So.
Yeah, not all programs put confidence in other universities' MA programs for sufficient preparation. I know that I came to UCSD in '99 with the equivalent of a BA from Germany. And then the MA was sort of part of the package. In fact, I was so unaware that it was part of it that I got my MA certificate in the mail. I didn't even pay attention to the whole graduation ceremony thing, because I thought that's not what I do. But apparently people were waiting for me to walk. And yeah, and they still, most of the time at UCSD, when you came in with an MA, they still wanted you to do the whole thing. And they may have changed that a little bit. Dawn, I wonder, did you do a ton of directed readings, one-on-one meetings with a professor on a particular reading list?
Yes, I definitely did at least 2 quarters of just directed readings with my advisor. I can also add that they accepted 2 of the classes that I had from Fullerton as equivalent to UC Santa Cruz research classes. So that, I mean, was, helped 6 months advance the program. So it definitely is something that I appreciated. But yeah, certainly most of our seminars are about, I would say 8 to 10 people. But I mean, even the smaller ones that were 4 to 5, the difference I think with the MA program is that maybe sometimes you can hide in a room of 30, but when you come to a conference table, you really have to be ready to address, whatever the prompt questions are for the discussion questions. So there's nowhere to hide, but the pressure is on you to be ready to go. As Renee said, there's like maybe even a heightened sense that since it's at the PhD level now, not, what is the level of depth of analysis that you should be ready to engage in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This brings me back. My first semester, I had the American reading seminar, which was supposed to be a graduate class, but they only had 2 new students. And so it was just me and the other student in the first semester sitting across this overtired new father / associate professor who just scared the bejesus out of me. And there was the horrible experience. And he was exactly in my field. He did crime and punishment. And I only in my last year added him to my panel because he sort of asked through other channels, why wasn't he invited to be on my panel? And I told him, I'm too scared of you. Like, it just scared me so much in my first year that I just wanted to stay away. We were good afterwards. Anyway, your peers, you already, I think, Dawn, you said one of the perks is to be around with other PhD students from other fields who are all, bright people. Talk about your peers. Does it feel like I don't know, is it a more refined community of students? Is it a more annoying community of students? Is it both?
I can jump in. I don't think it's been annoying at all. I think I honestly learned so much from my fellow students. It's like, I think it's been a huge help because everyone has such particular research, projects, and it's actually been a lot of fun to get to know other people. And I love having the big, seminar discussions where I get to hear how they're applying all of this to their work as well. So I think I had the perception it would be a lot more competitive, and that would kind of maybe add some tension or drama or something in a PhD program. And it has not been like that at all. At CGU, everyone that I've met, we've been incredibly encouraging of each other. So I don't know, maybe if it was because my group, we started during COVID and it was so different and kind of unique, but I don't know. I think that's been kind of cool, and I'm glad that I was wrong about my initial perception.
Yes, a community of suffering. How do the others feel about your peers? Are they? Do you, outside of classes, do you hang out with them socially? And is that does that become a group of friends, or because it doesn't always turn out that way with the BA or the MA? Yeah,
I learned from in my undergrad not to be a lone wolf, because then you have a severe imposter syndrome, right? Everybody looks confident and they look like they read every page of the readings, and then when you talk to them, it's like, nope, it's just it's either fake it till you make it, or I skip a few pages, or I didn't get this, and then you're like, okay, thank God. But so I learned that. And you definitely meet a diversity of people, from, locally, from out of state, from out of the, international students. We learn from each other. And also, my cohort, we attend a lot of events from our department, like end of the year potluck, or we created a group chat. We help each other, like, hey, where can I find this copy for free? Does anyone have a free PDF file? I didn't get this reading. What is this author trying to say? Or sometimes when we're having a tough time, I tell, hey, John, I'm not fine. This is a heavy week. So it helps, in solidarity. It really does help build a community. Not just, sharing resources, but also, being each other's emotional support. So that would be, I know we have that question ahead of the panel, but that will be my number one advice is, get to know your peers. When you build that bond, it's less lonely, and you find a more sense of belonging on campus.
I don't want to be someone that brings the party down a little bit too much, because I do think that there's a little bit of automatic kind of camaraderie there, and especially if people look into going to a different country to do their PhD and stuff, I barely feel like an international student most of the time, but I technically am. So it is helpful to kind of find those groupings and just kind of be really open with people, because you do support each other a lot. But I will say, speaking as a woman, that sometimes there can be a little bit of assumed superiority from some of your peers, especially if you're doing a similar topic to someone. So always, if somebody in your program, there can be people in your program that might not necessarily intentionally put you down, but maybe make you feel like you don't know as much, or like you're not up to where you should be, especially if they are doing something similar to you. You can always learn from them if they're someone that you think that you can really get along with. So that's a good thing about having like a strong camaraderie with your peers. But then on the flip side of that, you can kind of use a little bit of that as motivation to be like, okay, let me see if I'm getting the same conclusions as this person. Am I not? Why am I not? Am I actually that far behind? And then just like really make sure you're sticking up for yourself. Because I've noticed that being an issue with a lot of younger people in the program, and women in particular, younger women in particular, that get spoken over a lot by their older male peers, and things like that. So just always make sure that you're confident in what you're saying, and it'll make for a better relationship with your peers if you are solid in what you know and what you kind of are going for.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. I wonder, Dawn, you are sort of almost done, and so now you know when you look amongst your fellow PhD students, there are newbies, you know, like Renee, Sarah, or Miguel would be, and you've been there now for 6 years. Do you remember yourself coming in, being new, and looking up to graduate students who are pretty much almost finished and sort of clearly seem to know their way around? And have you taken on this sort of senior mentor role for some of these students?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up this question, because I think what really helped me my first year, when I was really nervous about trying to get through the seminar work, is reaching out to another advisee under our same advisor who was 4 years ahead of me. And so she was very gracious along the way. She said, whenever you have a question, you know, just let me know. I've gone through this before. I just went through this 6 months ago. So what was, I think, really helpful about that relationship is that you can be more candid with the fellow student than you can with your advisor or senior faculty members or even staff. But you're going to have a lot of questions along the way to, how do I get through this? You know, how do I prepare for the qualifying exam? It's so nightmarish when you're getting it prepared for it, or the job market. And she helped me prepare for job market interviews. And so it's just been incredibly valuable. I haven't, because of COVID, I haven't been able to reach out with the newer cohorts at UC Santa Cruz as much. So I think that's been one thing that I've sort of missed in the last couple of years. I haven't gotten to know the newer students.
Yeah, so I think what Sarah says is generally it's not a competitive environment amongst history PhDs, and that's in part because you all do such unique individual work where competition really doesn't apply. But also, I think a heads up, just because these are all very smart people that read a lot on issues that should inform and enlighten you in your communication with others, there's still a lot of condescension. There's still a lot of male entitlement that will crop up, and so these patterns, PhD students are not immune to this. And also I think, like Renee's advice to, don't think this can't happen there. It absolutely can. But generally, you are a small group of, a community of suffering sometimes. I remember as a grad student that I found at the end of the day, I found that a lot of grad students have a hard time switching off. and that you are in a constant state of critical thinking and taking things apart and making the idea of, like, say, PhD students going to Disneyland together an impossibility, right? So I wonder whether this occur to you, that, you know, PhD students are always on, or maybe you just have a better group. That could also be.
Yeah, so it's the way that we can all kind of experience this. You just take a quick trip to UC Irvine. The way the city is kind of established around the university really promotes, you live among the PhD students, you guys have your own neighborhood, and for at least for my cohort, many of my fellow PhD students were married to people that were either finishing or in PhD programs. So it compounded that even more so. It was quite interesting. So you do definitely get that, like, there's no way out, so to speak. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know if that goes, you know, outside of UCI, but for sure UCI is somewhat like that.
I think this happens a lot, and you know, a lot of PhD students like it. You know, that they live and breathe this world all the time, from morning to night. I remember at the time I was together with someone who's not an academic, and she found it quite insufferable. But that, you know, that's a personality matter. You had already said, Chris, Miguel, you had said that there's a funding package at UCI, so you don't really have to worry. How generally do you guys make ends meet? If you don't have to go deep into debt to pay fees and tuition, how else do you cope?
Well, I can definitely jump in on this one, because I think I've had a very different experience in regards to funding. At Claremont Graduate University, it's a private university, and they did not have a tuition, you know, package. So for the first time ever, I had to take out student loans. When I was at Cal State Fullerton, I worked as a makeup artist, and that was how I made ends meet back then. But then now, being a PhD student and a teacher, I had to get way more creative with how I figured out a way to make money. So I learned a lot more about finance, investing, different business opportunities, passive income, and it's very unorthodox. But one of the main ways that I actually have been able to kind of have like a side hustle, if you will, I found out from my students that apparently I have a good voice. They kept telling me that because I had to record lectures in the beginning of COVID. So one even said a teachery voice. So I kind of used that to my advantage, and I started doing audiobooks, educational material, and sometimes you can negotiate a royalties contract where you can get kind of passive income for about up to 7 years. So I'm in the process of it, you know, but it has challenged me and kind of forced me to get more savvy with finances. So it was a strategic risk, if you will.
Well, I mean, I knew that when Miguel said they have a funding package, I knew this is probably not going to be a universal experience. And Claremont, I remember back in the day when I was looking around, other than the UC's, Claremont, this is an expensive school.
It is, but I mean, one of the main reasons I did it though was because I had such a particular project, and that was why I went to them. So, and then finding an advisor who believed in the project. Not to say that the other programs aren't amazing, but I think it just comes down to the individual person. You have to find the program that works for you. So
I listen to a lot of audiobooks. You need to tell me where you're on, so maybe this is something I would want to hear. How do the rest of you make ends meet?
I would add that, I mean, UCSC has a funding package, but Santa Cruz is also one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. So you know, you just barely squeak by. So applying for fellowships and grants is a major part of my time. Every year, there's a cycle of when calls for grants and fellowships go out, and then you try to address all the ones that you think that your work will give you a competitive chance at. And then I would also connect this back to your advisor. And also what you want to do is cultivate, 2 or 3, 4 faculty members that could vouch for you and provide letters of recommendation, because I've applied to, 20 or 30 fellowships over the last 6 years, and they're time consuming, but some of them are small pots of money, 500, 700, others 10,000, 50,000. There's a lot of big ones out there, but they all require letters of recommendation. And so this is where it's really important to have that connection with your faculty advisor and hopefully 2 or 3 other faculty members that can help support your application.
All right. Any other? Renee?
I have a little bit of a unique situation, I think, because I'm in another country. So I have a hard limit on the ways that I can get money. Like I can't just go get a secondary job.
Right.
Because legally I am only allowed to have a job through my university. So my program does give funding. I have funding for the first 4 years, and then after that it would be fellowships and the like. So I do take out a small little bit of a loan, but it's nothing compared to the kind of long run of what a lot of people in the States have for just their BAs alone. So I've kind of figured it out so that I can live off of my funding, which is, it is pretty strong funding, plus the small loans I take out. But I do live in one of the top 3 most expensive cities in North America. So that's one of the things that my MA advisor, when I was applying for schools, was really kind of, you need to be careful, because you do need to find a place where you could see yourself living for the rest of your life, because you're going to be there for 5, 6 plus years. So you could potentially set down roots that you can't really pick up that easily. So you have to be kind of really careful about your budgeting if you're like me and you grew up in North Orange County and you're used to a very specific kind of culture and diversity and city life kind of thing. So that kind of goes into making ends meet. Somebody could go to a program that's in a much less populated area, and the cost of living is a lot lower, but you're trading some things out.
I guess Chris and Miguel, you are taken care of with the funding packages? No one here is a Starbucks barista?
So actually, I don't know how this might affect everyone else, but to kind of plug in for the Cal State University's Chancellor's Doctoral Incentive Program. If you apply to that, which I believe you don't have to be a Cal State University student previously, but it helps that we all are. If you apply for that and you get into it, you are allowed to take it up to $10,000 an academic year for 3 years. Compared to other student loan interest rates, it's really competitive. And if you get hired at a CSU, the program will pay it back over the course of, I believe, 5 years.
That is true. Can you repeat the name of the program again?
Sure, yes. The Cal State University Chancellor Doctoral Incentive Program. I do know for those that are here from our history department at Cal State Fullerton, if you do go to the office that deals with financial aid and fellowships and scholarships, they generally advertise the CSU CIP as a part of a kind of a long-term thing, beginning with just kind of graduate funding. So if you're in a master's program, they might have a fellowship that you can apply for, with the hopes that then you'll get into a pre-doctoral fellowship. I forget the name of it. I believe it's started with, I think, Sally something, I believe. And then it was the
Sally
idea that once
the Sally
Casanova scholars, yes, those are that's the top one that you probably would get at a Cal State. And then when you get into a Ph.D. program, then you would apply for the CSU CDIP, and then that would look great on your resumes and would help you if you were looking for some funding on the side as well.
Yeah, yes, I would also recommend the Sally Casanova, because it's specifically meant to move students through the PhD and then have them be CSU faculty. And yes, if that's your path, then you really are getting an incredible financial bonus out of that. Thank you. Miguel.
Yeah. Just wanted to add, aside from fellowships and other type of funding, also, we, take advantage of other campus resources, right? So there's, I think it's CalFresh, right? And also there's a pantry on campus. You file an application, and if you have any, I think there's a requirement to prove of like your income, and you make an appointment for like 15 minutes. You go, you grab any necessities that you need, not just food, but like also other daily necessities, hygienic and all that. That has been helpful to me, and I know a lot of my peers took advantage of it. They saved a lot of money on weekly necessities. So aside from funding, there's also other resources on campus that can provide assistance.
Let me ask you then, so none of you really have to TA all the time? No? Renee? Okay, yes. Because I remember that was, for me, the first year I got fully covered through a Fulbright. And after that, I TA nonstop, and that covered my bills. I had, I think, a year of a fellowship. And at the time, there was a lot of talk about the unionization of TAs. And I remember actually being in a strike action. And and I've been trying to recover that newspaper at UCSD, a paper where I was in the front line of the marching TA crowd, mighty angry. So we did have to work. It's nice to hear that it's not quite so essential anymore. I remember all my fellow students also were all TAs at the time, and that was really the way in which the bachelor students at UCSD got any instruction in any history course, because there were the big lectures with 150, 200 students, and then you had 5 TAs that then took the group into their individual sections and for the other half of the class. That doesn't seem to be the typical MO anymore. Either way, I'm glad that, except for Renee, most of you guys are doing fine. And Renee, I had the similar problem that you had, that I had a student visa, and so all money could only come from campus. There was no other way. That can be limiting. So let's do this quickly, because we have so much to talk about, and because all of you have such good experiences to share. Could you quickly recall what was the most valuable class during your time at CSUF? The one that you think that's really the one that made the difference?
I can go because I know exactly what class it was.
Right.
I don't know if it's still taught, but the history of fascism with Aitana Gia. Basically any class with her taught me more than like 4 years with like anyone else ever did. I mean, that's not to say anything bad about the rest of the faculty. I learned tons and tons of classes, but anyone ever has an opportunity to take a class with Aitana Gia, go for it. That's part of the reason that I'm at the school that I'm at now. I was kind of just floating along, kind of just going through my classes, kind of, I don't know, scraping by. And that was the fascism class was the first one that really challenged me and really got me actually debating and forming my own opinions instead of just writing what I thought the professor wanted to hear. Because if you did that, she'd be like, this is terrible. So anything.
Excellent. Very, very good. She'll be glad to hear it. Any other?
Yeah, I can definitely jump in. I took a Reformation class with Dr. Burnell, and that was probably the most difficult class I ever took, but probably the most valuable, because that final paper for her class, I remember the first time I sent it in, it was just, covered in remarks, but she helped me so much become a strong writer. And then that paper I wrote for her class ended up being the first history paper I ever got published. So it was a lot of work, but I'm forever thankful for that experience, because, she helped me get published and learn how to be a better researcher and writer.
Where did that get published?
Will Beetham.
Oh, of course, yes, excellent. Chris, Miguel, Don, do you have any classes you remember that were specifically important?
I don't remember the class number, but Dr. Ben Cothra's American Civil War era class I took. And at the time I had come back into the program and I wasn't sure what my research focus was going to be. But after that class, I was just exposed to a bunch of texts, and I knew that was what I wanted to study. So it sealed the deal for me. I definitely remember it well.
Yeah, nice. Miguel, Chris?
Just so many classes really. But prior to kind of diving into Indian history, I was more trained as a Middle East historian. So classes with Professor Rostam, Professor Mikhail, all day. Those were great classes. And then into the master's program, I took Professor McLean's, I believe it's 541T, which is I think for like the non-Western courses, I believe. And that was British India. And it's sealed for me, like, no, I definitely want to focus more on Indian history, and it's been that way ever since.
Great. Miguel?
Yeah, I appreciated all the courses that I took, but I would say definitely taking classes with Dr. Stephen Neufeld and Dr. Philippe Zacayer, Latin American historians. I learned about, theory and the methodologies in Latin American history, and how to really tackle on ideas of race, of nationalism, empires, gender in the Latin American context, and then as in general, and then how it is in Mexico versus Panama versus Peru. It does help me because my field is going to be researching specifically Japanese immigrants in Mexico. And so I feel like that trained me to look at theories on race in 20th century Mexico and how this applies to, immigrants, especially very racially different immigrants in a wake of nationalism.
Yeah. Those are all great classes. Do you remember, looking back, are there things you think you should have done differently, mistakes you made?
Right. I know all the things I did wrong, but the biggest one that I know is that I kind of had the easy route of none of the programs that I was in had language requirements. So my BA didn't have a language requirement and my MA didn't have a language requirement. And that poses a major problem for a transnationalist who studies countries that have completely different language, like families. So I would have kind of kicked myself a little bit to really get on at least one of my languages that I have to learn, which would be my biggest advice, is to, in your BA, really start thinking about what are the languages I'm going to need, even peripherally. Like there might be an archive somewhere and you need to know at least a little bit of that language. So that's what I wish I would have done. Like that's the number one thing, is just focused on one of my billion languages I have to learn.
Sarah, you also had a thought there.
Yeah, something I really wish I would have done differently is I actually have an invisible physical disability, and I was embarrassed when I started grad school to ask for help. So I did about half of the program without any accommodations, and I really wish I could go back and tell my younger self like it's okay to ask for help and to get those accommodations a lot earlier, because it made the world of a difference. But yeah, that's probably the number one thing I would change.
That's actually really good advice to ask for help, whether it is with a disability or other challenges that you face, to not sort of stoically, gradually drown. First, do less than the best work you can do, and afterwards start to disappear. There's too many students I know, and male students do this more often, I think, even than female students, to not ask for help because they believe they should do it. They need to just be able to handle it. And the number of students who have missed the midterm, written the midterm, but keep coming to class as if everything's okay, and if they just it goes away like that toothache, that's that's not helpful. And whether it is because you feel shame or whether it is because you feel pride, it's always better to ask for help. So you're absolutely right. That's good advice. Others who feel like there's something I should have done differently, Chris?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are quite a few things. The first one I would recommend, so definitely for the languages, Renee's right on with that one. If you want to apply for language training, that's what the FLAS is for, the Foreign Language Area Studies. I believe this is through the U.S. Department of Education. And apply to those in your bachelor's programs, apply to those in your master's programs. Because once you get to the Ph.D., you have so much work that you need to do. It's hard to do those things. Excuse me. Another one to apply for is the Fulbright. Fulbright, ideally, you would do the Fulbright more in your master's level, kind of give you a foundation into which area you want to work in terms of which country you want to work in. I'm going to be doing a Fulbright this upcoming year, and it's going to be primarily just to write my dissertation. So I would keep that in mind as well. There are certain things that you could apply for that would make your PhD program a lot easier. Same thing goes for pre-doctoral fellowships. So I think Miguel mentioned, I think he has an award for a year of funding. If that's a pre-doctoral award, you can do that now with bachelor's students, master's students especially. Apply for that. We have I believe it's Eugene Cortorobles is another award through the UC system that you can apply for. You apply for it when you apply to PhD programs at the UCs. I didn't do that, and I regret not doing that. I recommend students that are interested in going to UCs definitely apply for that. There's a bunch of others. Ford Fellowship also has one as well. A colleague of mine is funded through the Ford Foundation, and it's a pre-doctoral, so keep that in mind as well. I wish I had done all that.
Yeah, pre-doctoral support. That's an excellent suggestion. I'm going to skip the next question unless there are big important points to be made here on extracurricular activities. The one thing I would tell anyone always is to, if you can fit it in, do study abroad. I think that's always helpful. It may even kickstart your language learning, but it's just an eye-opening experience. How did you guys decide on your university, or if you didn't decide but rather had to see who would take you, which is still, it's hard enough. How many universities did you apply for? Renee?
I went through 2 cycles. I really rushed my first cycle, thinking that I could just finish my master's really quickly. And just go immediately into it. So I didn't get anywhere my first time. And I didn't have anyone that was really kind of jumping at my research, because my research, it's very difficult to find places that are willing to kind of back it, because of the inflammatory nature and because it can get you so much flack from one side or the other. So I kind of had to shop myself around a lot to people. And I ended up my second cycle going through like maybe 10 different schools just to see if anyone would take me. And I ended up applying to 3 that were really excited to have me. And that was kind of what made the difference, of the schools that were kind of like, I would be happy to work with you, but I'm just telling you that the school might not be okay with certain publications that you're going to be like looking to do. So I ended up my second cycle applying to 3, getting into all 3, 2 in Canada and 2 in the States.
Excellent. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I originally actually was applying to UCI and was planning to go with their program, honestly, because they were really good about things with family. Like, I was actually very, open with them and telling them, like, if I decide to have a baby, like, that's something I really want to do. Is there flexibility with the program? How do you help families, funding, things like that? And almost went with them, but they didn't really have as much to offer for museum studies. And Claremont was also the same in the sense, like, very good with flexibility, helping with family, and they had an emphasis in museums. So I actually had like kind of a year and a half in between applying to each of them, but I will say they were both amazing with that and helpful with it.
Don, how about you?
I applied to 10 different schools, and one of the things I did, the sort of unofficial part of the application, was I reached out to relevant faculty members at all of those places to say, hey, my name is Don, I'm in the course of applying to your university, would you be available to take me as an advisee? I think 6 of them never got back to me. A couple of them did. Only one actually appeared to have interest in my research, and that was at Santa Cruz. So I mean, it worked out that the one that got back to me is the place where I ended up going, partially for that reason.
Who is your advisor, by the way?
Kate Jones.
Okay.
So she's a Civil War researcher in post-emancipation Virginia, and she works a lot with families and children. So as a 19th century historian, there were only really 4 people, even in California, Oregon, and Washington, where I had applied to. So most likely when you're applying to programs, there's really only going to be 20, 30 people, maybe. There's a very small group that are going to be experts in your exact field. So I think part of your application is, can I work with someone who's not in my field, or what are the advantages or disadvantages of working with someone who's not directly in your research, but maybe tangentially related to it or adjacent to it. You mentioned that your own professor was in not in the same field that you were in, Volker.
Right,
I couldn't remember.
He was in economic history, yeah.
Economic history, right.
Yeah. I think that's really, and you all nodded, like you all did that too, right? And you try to get in touch with the faculty that you are seeking out as your advisors. Miguel?
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, you want to research the people that you might potentially work with, right? It's not, you got to know if they have somebody in your area of specialty or something similar, right? And also, again, it gives you an insight of how they function, their personality. So I reached out to many faculty of the, I believe it was 7 universities I applied to. And I just became enamored with UCI because the person who became my advisor, like, she was just such a nice personality. She's very, like, get to the let's get to work and all that, but she is a nice, compassionate person, and I spoke with another faculty, so another Latin Americanist. I asked all of them because I also want to see, like, the possibilities. I told everybody, I'm a DACA recipient, okay, so would this be a barrier? All of them said that should not be a barrier, especially universities can be very great, especially in California, about allies, towards a lot of underrepresented communities, right? Yeah. And I spoke with them, and I'm glad I did, because the application was a pain, because it asked, like, if you're a citizen, if you're a resident, and if not, like, what are you? And they gave me like 20 different categories that were not any close to my legal status. And so during winter, that other professor called me saying, hey, have you been living here? Or I'm like, yeah, I've been here since, for 20 something years. Like, oh, because you put on your application. I'm like, I told them, it's like, okay, just making sure you have good funding. And so when you reach out to these people and you show, like, how much you want to go there, and, I mean, obviously at the level of comfort, but, like, if you share, like, your ambitions and maybe your reservations of, like, would I be well represented or well supported, right? I think that helped me because other universities didn't reach out to me when there was difficult to check my status on the applications. And this person, like, checked with me and make sure, like, okay, just to clarify, okay. And then they did have funding for me, and I that helped me be in a PhD program, and one that I felt comfortable in.
Yeah, it's important to pick up those signals of engagement and interest from the university and the programs. I remember I wrote a letter of inquiry to Yale, and I got an automated response, nothing else ever. And they also told me that they're not going to talk to me and they're not going to give me anything but this automated email response, which looked like it was on paper. I mean, it looked like an old typewriter, even though it was an email, so clearly it wasn't a typewriter, but it looked so decidedly old and uncaring. And I thought, you know what, I'm not going to hell, it turns out, and I was fine with that. And the reaction I got from my advisor at UCSD was instantly, you know, this kind of interest in making sure that these kind of status issues or funding issues, and that someone cares to address them. I'm going to move us ahead because we are, with the five of us and the five of you, we have so many good stories that we may be running out of time here. So we know at what stage of your PhD you are. And when I ask you now to describe your research, I want you to give me the elevator pitch. Right? So I don't know whether your advisors have taught you the elevator pitch, where you need to be able to do this on the 5 floors that it takes you to get up to your office. So in an elevator pitch, what's your research? I'm going to go from top to bottom, okay? So Chris, you're first.
Okay, great. So yes, I work on 2 individuals. They are Hindu nationalists as well as Indian anti-colonialists. Lajpat Rai is the more well-known of the 2, the Lion of the Punjab, and Bhai Parmanand, who is an Arya Samajist and a missionary for the Arya Samaj movement. These individuals, in their attempts to escape the British imperial surveillance all over the world, traveled to places such as South Africa, Guyana, San Francisco. We have the Gadar Party movement, a very prominent movement among the Punjabis that were living in Central California. We're also around the Berkeley area, and Bhai Parmanand was a part of that. Lajpat Rai would have worked closely with W.B. Du Bois in and around New York. So these are individuals that I'm fascinated by, and I wanted to know more about them and how specifically their ideas were shaped by both their global travels as well as their times either in prison, which would be Bhai Parmanand was in the Andamans, or in a sort of like an internment camp, which would be Lajpat Rai was sent to Mandalay. And yeah, that's a taste of what I kind of work on.
That was a Manhattan elevator. That was not a UCI elevator. All right. Let's see who's next. Sarah.
Yes, so my research combines my love for makeup, conservation, and history. And ultimately, when I was at Cal State Fullerton, the most difficult thing to write about was the thing I loved, cosmetic history. So now my research is aimed at not only establishing cosmetic history as a legitimate field, but also to build a museum to conserve cosmetic cultural heritage, so that way future historians can be able to do the research that maybe I wasn't able to. So kind of blending all of my passions together.
That's great. That's the 8 floors up to the history part. Chris, by the way, I sympathize. I hated having to do this as a grad student, and I felt most inept when I had to be brief about my subject. Renee.
Oh boy. I basically want to understand why there was such a huge period of terrorism in the 60s and 70s. What about the Cold War and governments being so disconnected from their populaces that caused people to turn completely away from kind of the acceptable norms of society and turn to one another? So I do that through looking at the Baader-Meinhof gang in Germany, the IRA in Northern Ireland, the PFLP in Palestine, and the Weather Underground in the US. And I want to take kind of the lessons that we learned from that and apply it to modern day situations.
I can see now why you have to learn so many languages, because when you said the 1960s terrorism, I thought, oh man, there's the Basques and there's the Rote Armee-Fraktion in Germany, and oh yeah, man, what a mess. But that sounds like a fun project, and yeah, it raises the question: why this is a transnational phenomenon, right? So this is not unique to, you could maybe explain the IRA alone, but yeah. Anyway, very good. So next, Miguel.
Yeah, so I'm picking up from my master's thesis and looking at the Japanese in Mexico, and I'm really excited because this is a trans-Pacific, transnational field, right? And my advisor keeps asking me, like, you really need to pick up the language, because so far in historiography, not a lot of people have put in the Japanese perspective. You know, we know what Mexico City is saying in the matter, and maybe these immigrants, but we don't know what Tokyo was saying, you know, to allow these people to come in and then establish, you know, communities. So it is exciting because I get to continue practicing Japanese and probably go to the archives in Tokyo and Yokohama, as well as in Mexico City. It's a little nervous because Japanese is not the easiest language to pick up. So, yeah. And I also started learning Mandarin Chinese because I want to compare Japanese Mexicans versus Chinese Mexicans experiences, right? And yeah, because I focused on theories on race, especially Orientalism, because in Mexico, race is fluid. I mean, especially, you know, historically, you know, it's not people's physical appearance, but behavior. And so for a lot of Mexican elites and politicians, Japanese, because they came from a empire rising and industrializing quickly, and they wanted to do that. The conclusion was, because they're doing that, there must be Europeans. Only Europeans make empires and are prestigious. They're not like the Chinese. So they were seen as honorary Europeans and then honorary Mexicans in the age of mestizo nationalism. And, you know, they had a different experience during World War II in the internment camps versus, you know, elsewhere in the Americas, like Peru, the US, Canada. They were not criminals, basically.
Miguel, I think UCI is not teaching the elevator pitch, because that was like a Kuwaiti elevator ride. But I mean, clearly, it's very transparent what excites you and also what the challenges are of your research, and it's incredibly hard to sort of like find a way to get this, especially because your projects are getting so much more diverse and interesting. And when I think of the research that took place 25 years ago, transnationalism really wasn't yet a thing. I mean, that just like really, it's like a post 9/11 historiographical trend. And Miguel, you're doing the same thing in that regard. Now, lastly, Dawn, you already gave us a quick title at the beginning, but for the elevator ride.
Yeah, so I'm interested in, there's a lot of research that's been done about American Civil War soldiers. Thousands of books have been written about them, but very few about veterans. So soldiers in their lives after the war, and then there's practically nothing on the tens of thousands of Union veterans that lived in California. So to address this lacuna in the historiography, what I try to do is examine the way veterans organized, fraternal organizations like the Grand Army of the Republic, and how they affected things like Memorial Day being established. And then I also look at veterans in prominent positions in culture through journalism, and also through politics through the Republican and Democratic parties in the state.
I believe Bill Deverell wrote an essay in History of Ideas. So it's an exploratory, it's at least 10 years old or 15 years old, about California as sort of the antidote to the Civil War.
He's at USC, right? Or
yeah.
Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Great. Well, all your research projects sound so fantastic. And I'm going to modulate my question here a little bit, because I can tell what gets you most excited. I can also tell what makes you nervous. In some of your cases, I kind of know where this research came about. Do you remember a point where you thought, I'm reading on the subject, but I can't get a question? And the transition to the, oh, I have something. Do you remember that moment where you think, I think I can write something new in your graduate studies?
Yeah, I can definitely expand on that. Dr. Fitch was actually the one who really believed in my cosmetic history research, and I, had this kind of perception of it and was getting frustrated because it was basically just like a timeline of the products and really nothing else. And she was the one who said, like, no, keep going at it. Maybe you can look at it through a political lens, an economic lens. And she was the one who really challenged me. And her class was the moment everything changed. So.
Really?
Mine was a little bit of a complicated journey, because this is going to sound really pompous, but so much of the field that had already been written, sorry, my roommates are a little loud right now. So much of the field that had already been written were not by historians. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it was wrong. Like, as you're reading and you're reading accounts, you can tell that's not adding up. This isn't it. So a lot of the histories that we have of these organizations are written by journalists, sort of going into writing books, and it's kind of trying to like evoke an emotional response, or they're like accounts by former government officials. So it's all coming from this, look how horrible these actions were kind of thing. And I was like, that seems like a really simplistic kind of way to approach these things. There had to have been a reason. And then you start kind of piecing things together. And I just started seeing the connections between these organizations, even if it was just like one person from each organization was like, oh, I read a book by this person. I read a book by this person, whatever. You just start seeing the little links. And lucky for me, there's a big hole in scholarship that I get to fill.
Yeah, I think the lacuna, as Dawn said, and I enjoyed that word very much. When you come across those, I mean, that's the first discovery. There's a gap, there's a hole, or in your field. And I remember then when I first read it and wrote about prisons, and it was not the field that it was now. A lot of it was not from historians, and so you can see how we as historians do things differently from other disciplines, and how we make other broader connections that a sociologist might not do. Now I'm going to ask on this one. I'm going to speed us up a little bit. We will go over time because I want to really actually talk about your plans for the future and make sure that we have time for that. But hands up, who here has presented at a professional conference? And generally, was this a rewarding experience, or skip it?
I think
I'll go ahead. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it was very rewarding, definitely.
Yeah, I would just add, if you're planning on entering the professoriate, you're going to need to be able to present your research. So it's, you have to take a dive into the deep end. It definitely is scary, but your advisor will work with you. And the thing about, I think, presenting at conferences is that there's sort of the old tradition of you write a paper and then you distribute it. So you don't have to just speak off, the cuff and be able to deliver all of your research off the top of your head, but you prepare for presenting a paper, and then commenters can, give you feedback afterwards. So I think it's also an important part of peer review, the peer review process, and then also networking with colleagues who in your field who may serve on committees of your own making in the future.
Yeah.
Speaking as someone who does not plan on being a professor, I think it was a really rewarding experience just to see, especially if you do conferences, they're a little bit kind of an interdisciplinary conference. It's really rewarding to see your kind of methodology really play out and interest people. Because my whole goal is I want to bring the historian's perspective and the historian's craft into politics and kind of peace building and stuff like that. So it's really nice to bring in those elements of like poli-sci into a history conference, so that people are like, oh, I wouldn't have seen it that way when you're blending these two ideas, and then vice versa, going to a poli-sci conference and people being like, oh, I've never ever thought of it through this lens or connected these two things. So it's really rewarding for ways that you don't even expect for it to be rewarding.
You remind me. I'm listening right now to a book on the origins of World War I, Sleepwalkers. It's a slog. It's a big book, but the beginning is about the Serbian nationalists, and I picked up echoes of like the questions of terrorism, both in the 60s and in the early 2000s. So I can see why you might want to, why you see yourself in other places other than the professoriate. Did you guys go to big conferences, OAH, AHA, or were these small specialized ones?
I've gone to both, and I think they're both beneficial, very different experiences to kind of get a good overview of the major trends in your field. But then the more particular ones that I've gone to were more focused on oral history, and those were incredibly helpful as well. I think the ones that have more of a niche, you get to network a little bit more.
That's right.
And yeah, and especially for oral history, it was very helpful. I learned a lot about different technology and things like that. So how to kind of streamline the process and transcribing everything, and that was helpful too. So there's pros and cons to both.
Don.
I would also say there's graduate student specific conferences. So that was the one that I presented at Louisiana State, and it did not feel as nearly, I would have been a lot more nervous if I was presenting with mid-career historians than other grad students, because everybody's coming in with the same kind of nervousness and anxiety and then working their way through it. So that would be something that I would recommend if you're building your way up to presenting at larger conferences, than to look at graduate student specific panels.
I will say that the discipline generally really relies on graduate students presenting their research, because proportionately, the largest amount of research done in the field is actually done by graduate students. Since the number of students that then move on to PhDs and then publish a book every 5 years, that's a very small number of people who actually end up doing this. So most people do the bulk of the research for the dissertation, and then in smaller bits and jabs over the ensuing decades. So much research happens at your stage. You are actually sort of the core of the discipline, really, and that's why events like the OAH or the AHA, they really actually need you. Don, actually, you're much more central than the mid-career person to those kind of events. Now I want to actually shift to your plans for the future, and that's really quite important these days, because the PhD programs today are not what they were 20 years ago. So maybe we start first with Renee, since you already said you're not planning on the professoriate. What are your plans here for the future?
They're a little back and forth. In the same kind of direction, but a little back and forth on the path that I want to take to get there. There's about 3 options that I've thought of. So policy think tanks, they're always looking for people to profile organizations and entire nations, basically. So that's kind of my top option right now. I think that's the way that I think I can put my skills to best use. It's easy to kind of network your way into those areas and things like that. So think tank work. I'm also very passionate about on the ground peace building organizations, because I think that some of them are going about some of the things that they're doing in a little bit of a one kind of dimensional way. So that's another path. And then the third one is always, State Department. Yeah. They have an entire historian wing of the State Department that deals with people that do history of the State Department, and then again the profiling of organizations and policy recommendations or anything like that.
I think you will be picked up quickly in either of those. So you will be certainly, I think, returning to this roundtable at one point as a think tank, other kind of DC professional and policy making. I can see that. Now, what about the others? What plans do you have? Gotta have some plans.
Yeah, no, that's it's a good question. I would say, at least in my experience with UCI, but it does feel like it could be with a lot of PhD programs, is this is a blind spot that a lot of graduate students have an issue with in terms of like, okay, I have my PhD, what do I do now? And a lot of them will say, good luck, I don't know. So hopefully, I mean, for the ones that go to different universities other than UCI, hopefully they're getting better at addressing that. I know UCI is trying to as well. My plans are either, if I can find a teaching position, that would be ideal, but I'm also keeping in mind federal government. And I also work with an organization that its descendant organizations are connected to Hindu nationalism. So I'm not too far removed from that kind of terrorist organization, fascism and stuff like that. So I'm kind of in the same boat, I believe, as Renee probably, but yeah, it's always between those two, between either going federal government or finding a teaching position, or a bunch of postdocs just to keep you going until you find something.
Yes. Sarah, I can see you, doing audiobooks on cosmetic history, but also ultimately the museum path is clearly your direction. So I don't think you have that much uncertainty about your future, do you?
I don't think so. I think a lot of that has to come from my former life in business. Even with the master's program, I didn't get into it unless I knew how I was going to market it. So for me, the plan, I talked to my advisor a lot about this. He asks quite often, are you going to stay in teaching? Is it going to be more museums? And I would really like to still do both. And I think I've found a balance to it, thankfully, and hope I can maintain that. But yes, my plan is definitely to continue building the museum, and actually hopefully to continue building other museums, because one of the main reasons I did it was because I honestly feel like historians do not always have a lot of agency in the museum building process. We're hired by museums, but if historians are the ones to create them, I think they will look very different. So I definitely plan to stay in the museum side of things, but I also fell in love with teaching, and I don't really want to forego that either. So I'm going to figure out a way to keep balancing it.
Dawn, does UC Santa Cruz make this a topic and try to help you explore plan Bs?
I think so. There's definitely been some seminars where they talk about alt-ac, alternative careers to academia. And, to Chris's point, I think there's maybe a presumption for a lot of humanists. They start the program and they just imagine, I'm going to get a PhD and then I'll have a tenure track position in an R1 school, the end. But the reality is, of course, we know the job market for tenure track history instructors, full-time history instructors, is extremely competitive. And a lot of schools have had challenges, even, funding new lines, new history instructor positions. So just having a very clear understanding of the challenges of the job market, but also the opportunities that PhDs can give you to work in other fields. So I'm certainly interested in higher education management and administrative positions. And I've been teaching for 8 years, so I could still bring a lot of the experience that I've had with that, but trying to just be to recognize what the job market looks like. It's never too early to start seeing how the job market works and how many positions come out every year, when they come out, and try to get a sense of what that looks like for when you are ready to jump in the job market.
Miguel?
Yeah, definitely, especially in the humanities, there could be saturation in academia. When I was a master's student in Cal State Fullerton, I was working at the dean's office, more specifically in student affairs. That opened up a, another passion, helping students, helping especially organizations and resources, including helping file the data, with funding. So, I mean, definitely I can channel, my experiences as a student and, getting admitted to programs from a marginalized community, and how to retrieve sources. Has that been a challenge? And I can definitely channel that with, maybe a position on administration, right? Especially with student affairs. A lot of people in history, I think, have done that. I've seen it at Cal State Fullerton, and I've seen it at UCI. So that definitely can be another venue, channeling experiences in all these levels of education and to provide support and empowerment to other students.
The tenure track job market fluctuates, but generally is much lower now than it was 10, well, maybe not 10, but certainly 15 years ago. And of course, then there's a lot of variability depending on the fields. So Chris's specialization, of South Asian history, those tenure track positions are less common than, say, Don's in 19th century American history. The uncertainty of the tenure track future for PhDs makes it quite important that your programs talk about Plan Bs, of which there are actually plenty. So even if tenure tracks are thinning out, there are new ways. And I don't know whether you are members of the AHA, the American Historical Association. I see you all not. That's good. So this is also for everybody who listens. As a graduate student, as a PhD student, you are a member of these professional organizations at a student rate, affordable. And they actually have really made an effort in the last 10 years, I would say, to expand resources for newly minted PhDs and help them determine their own career paths. I think it's also important, increasingly, and you can tell me whether you remember that happening, that in the application process today, and programs are more and more interested in finding out what do you want to do with a PhD, because a lot of them are concerned that they're picking up students that they then cannot place, and it does not really, bring much glory to a program to mint 10 PhDs that all end up managing a Starbucks. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but you get my point. Do you remember in the application process that question came up? Renee nods. Yes, go ahead. Anybody else? No?
Yeah, that was one of the initial questions actually in the whole application process. In actuality, it helped get fellowship, like going into the program with a very specific project in mind helped me with the tuition a little bit. So it was actually a little bit competitive in that aspect. But if you came into the program with a very clear project in mind, they kind of ranked you a little bit and you got some help.
I had to be really specific about what I wanted to do, because on my application and in my statement and things like that, because my field is a very difficult one to pitch to programs, because the assumption to some extent is still that if you're accepting a PhD student, they want to go be a professor. So because mine is transnational, there's very few posts that aren't geographically the scope is geographic usually. So I had to be like, I understand that being a thematic historian is probably a terrible idea if I wanted to go into academia, but, and then I outlined all the different steps that I want to take and all the different fellowships and all the different things. So I think that helped to have a sense of what I want to do in the application process.
Well, I think that offers our students some good advice, that you actually need to come up with a bit of a plan. And there are materials out there. Obviously, we in the history department do that as much as we can with things like this. But also AHA, OAH, they try to help out. And there are ways to sort of retool the PhD into something quite different. The best example for a successful Plan B that I know is my editor at Oxford University Press, Susan Ferber, who started working at Oxford because she couldn't get a tenure track position. And so she was rejected, and that's really painful to experience in her search for tenure tracks. And then she worked at first as an assistant editor, then quickly rose up, and now she's pretty much a kingmaker in terms of who publishes books with Oxford, because Oxford's that's a major publishing house for academic work, and she works with all the greats and people turned to her. So she couldn't wish for a better outcome. Apart from that, I think financially it's a little more rewarding. I think for everyone it's important to think of plan B options that might be just as good, if not better, than tenure track positions. What I want to do now is, we are 50 minutes over time, and I'm actually going to skip your lessons and advice because you've given so much already. Unless you have some really catchy bon mot at the end of this, I rather want to give our 4 audience members, who I value very much because they all stuck around, the chance to ask questions. So I want to thank Keith, Ryan, Rachel, and Amer for being here, and see, is there anything specifically you would like to ask? Yes, Keith, go ahead.
Okay, so here is my problem. I did an undergrad degree in 1989. I started poli-sci and then got into a bit of a MIF and didn't quite make it through that program. The MIF actually was over your topic, Renee. In 1992, I pitched a paper in a national security policy class on using the military in order to deal with terrorism. And I was told that that was not an appropriate topic. I did not learn my lesson. I should have just said okay and found something else, because I was an academic. At any rate, at that point in my life, I wanted to get a PhD. I went to work, didn't get a PhD, did nothing. In 2017, I got into the master's program in environmental studies with a emphasis on environment and society. Completed that degree. Now I'm doing history, and I'm like, I really, this is what I like to do. I like to work in the area of thinking and things like that. One minor problem. I'm 57. And that means that most of the programs that accepted you will look at me and just go, this guy's too old, for exactly the reason Dr. Janssen just mentioned. How are we going to place this guy? He's going to be how old when he finishes? And then the second thing is that getting a job afterwards would also be an issue. So my question is, what do I do at this point? Or do I just say, well, get the history masters, do what I like to do, which is write about things and research stuff, because with a master's I can still do that, but realize that the history is just not a possibility. I've been told that before, by the way. I had a good friend who kind of was an Oxford PhD, a DPhil from Oxford, who told me that. He said, don't bother.
I'm going to turn this question around a wee bit for the panel and say, do you guys have returning students in the PhD program that are in Keith's position? And so I see the nods, okay. Can you tell me what they do, or how that, have you talked to them? Do you know?
I immediately had some thoughts on the whole thing. So one of the biggest things that I've talked to kind of the returning students in my program is that there are, a big worry about a lot of PhD programs is how long they can get drawn out, and a lot of that falls on the student. There are a lot of programs, you just have to kind of look for them, that have a time limit. Like, you have to get something done in 5 years, or you have to get something done in 6 years. And I feel like that was a draw for a lot of the returning students in my program, was that my program has a 6-year limit. Like, if you aren't done in the 6 years, you're kind of out of luck. And so I think that helps them kind of pitch what they want to do a little bit better, because it shows that time limit. It shows they know exactly what age they'll be done at, and they can kind of adjust their pitch to the school from there. I've actually had a lot of conversations about that, and which surprises me, and I didn't realize until this very moment.
Sarah.
Yeah, Keith, I mean, I've actually heard of very similar situations with people in my program. And, I would say, like, it ain't over till it's over. And you have a very unique perspective. And the number one, it's like, don't underestimate the viewpoint that you bring to academia and the research that you can do, because it's incredibly helpful. And then on top of, or to expand on what you were saying, where like you got some pushback on some topics, I don't know if it's my more gritty side, but as a historian, I think when someone's kind of telling you like, hey, don't look into that, that's probably what you should be looking into. So, keep going with it, have that gritty side. It's not over till it's over. And start before you're ready, because no one's ever truly entirely ready for the next big step. You just got to take that jump and, don't underestimate what you can bring to the table.
Heath, Heath, does the name Alexander Butterfield mean anything to you? Watergate. He is the person who told the Senate committee that there were microphones and a tape recording machine in the Oval Office. Alexander Butterfield came to UC San Diego. I was, I think, in my 4th or 5th year, and he came as a new graduate student. He was in his late 60s. He was dating Dr. Seuss's wife. But that's just an anecdote I have to tell on any occasion. But the point is, the program was happy to have him because he probably said, look, I'm not going to go for a tenure track position and hoping that this is my career building move. I want to get a PhD because I want to research something and I want to write a book. And if
that's me. That's what I want. Research.
I think what you need to do is in your application explain why this makes sense for you, because ultimately what they want is they want to invest their time and make sure that this goes all the way to the end, that you finish your PhD and that something comes of it. If you say, I want to then sit at home and enjoy the fact that I have a PhD, that's probably not a good plan. If you said, I want to then actually spend my life writing books, and I want to have the professionalization necessary to write books, that might actually really work. Or you say, I want to, or you want to work in other fields where you have a way in and you want to, put that to use. I think it depends on how you explain what you're going to do with it afterward.
Thank you guys so much for that. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I really do. That's what I'm thinking, because really for me, that's the goal, is to be able to do that research. I know I'm not going to be teaching at Cal State Fullerton, but maybe I can write.
Ryan, Rachel, or Amar, do you have any questions?
I don't, but thank you so much. This has been very insightful.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, for acknowledging. Good. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, then I want to thank you for sticking around for so long. I enjoyed this tremendously, as I always do, but specifically with you guys knowing that you will complete your PhDs and you will do exciting things as tenure track faculty, or in the State Department, or being a museum director, or in other ways being incredibly innovative. I'm looking forward to having you back at some point at another roundtable. I want to thank you. And I will create a recording for this and then share the recording with you as well. It's going to be a YouTube link. And have a good night, and I'll see you next time. All right? Bye, all.
Thank you, Volker. Thank you for having us.